A very good afternoon to one and all present here. Myself, Dr. Shri Priya from Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Research Institute, Pondicherry. At the outset, I thank the organizers for including me as a part of this Pediatric Anesthesia Update CME. So, in this session, I'll be talking about the intricacies with the ultrasound guided nerve blocks in children. Pediatrics is a heterogeneous group of population ranging from preterm newborn, infant, toddlers, preschool child, school age child, and adolescents, and it poses an entirely different set of challenges for the regional anesthesiologist. Smaller the child, greater are the challenges because the anatomical structures are smaller and situated more close to each other as well as to the adjacent vessels. The target nerves also become more superficial in smaller children. Children do not understand the importance of lying still for a procedure and they cannot communicate or differentiate paresthesia, pain, or pressure on injection. Despite these challenges, we are looking out for ways and means to provide an RA technique for pediatrics as a local anesthetic act by blocking the very transmission of impulses in the pain pathway either in the peripheral nervous system or in the central nervous system. As the quality of analgesia provided by local anesthetics is far superior than systemic analgesics with minimal side effects, and this is particularly important in this group of patients who have a magnified perception of pain as the pain is not well localized and the descending inhibitory pathways which modulate pain are not well developed. What are the frequently used regional anesthesia techniques in children? Caudal is still the most popular one in children less than 9 years. Spinal is preferred for kids about 10 years of age. Coming to the upper extremity, supraclavicular block is the frequently used one. When compared between the axillary and the interscalene block, interscalene is preferred for children about 10 years of age. Axillary has been used uniformly across all age groups. The lower extremity, it is the femoral or the saphenous nerve block in the adductor canal as well as the popliteal or sciatic nerve block. Truncal block has been uniformly used across all age groups depending on the indication. So the frequently used truncal blocks are the ILIH and the TAB block. While the total number of children receiving regional anesthesia has increased over the years, there's also a gradual shift towards using peripheral nerve blocks. In 2007, 75% of regional anesthetics were central neuraxial blocks. In 2015, the ratio has become somewhat like 50-50. What has brought about this change? This is a statistics from Pediatric Regional Anesthesia Network. This data and most of the other data also in my presentation is from this one big study from Pediatric Regional Anesthesia Network that has involved 1 lakh regional anesthetics in children across 21 centers. So with the advances in ultrasound, the scope for regional anesthesia practice in pediatrics has also expanded. 95% of blocks in 2015 were done under ultrasound guidance. Only 5% were either under landmark guidance or using a dual guidance or nerve stimulator guidance. Obviously, as our confidence with peripheral nerve block increases, we also see its wider application and also use it whenever possible in place of central neuraxial block as it provides a profound analgesia which is long lasting as well as it has minimal systemic side effects. We all know for a successful block, we need to inject the right dose of the right drug in the right place. And if the technique has minimal side effect and complication, I will definitely prefer it over any other technique. Some of the basic complications with regional anesthesia is one is failure, the others are intraneural injection, intravascular injection, block-specific complications like pneumothorax or phrenic nerve palsy and infection. And ultrasound has added objectivity to regional anesthesia. We are now able to see where to inject. By looking at the spread of the drug, I can approximately interpret how much of drug to use. These two has grossly reduced the incidence of failure, and by being able to visualize the needle tip, I am able to avoid intraneural injection, intravascular injection, or damage to surrounding structures like pleura, etc. Bear in mind that ultrasound guided regional anesthesia is only as good as the operator himself. Apart from the availability of equipment, what are the constraints in ultrasound guided regional anesthesia? One is the knowledge, other is the skill. Knowledge of the equipment, knowledge of how to optimize an image, knowledge of sonoanatomy, knowledge of the block and its dynamics. And in skills, we need extreme precision in needle manipulation and pay attention to the ergonomics too when such precision is needed. So, explore it in children only after acquiring sufficient skills on phantoms or adults. Understanding zone anatomy means we should be able to identify not only our targets but also the structures that is surrounding it. So this is the ultrasound image of supraclavicular brachial plexus in an adult. We should be able to identify the brachial plexus as well as the surrounding structures such as subclavian artery, the muscles, the first rib and the pleura, so that we can avoid damage to these surrounding structures too. Skill wise, we need to have a clear visualization of the needle tip. It should not be touching any neural elements, it should not be intravascular, and in this example it should not be touching the pleura too. As we hydrolocate or inject small volumes of local anesthetic, we should be able to see a good spread of local anesthetic across our target structures. Now this is how we want our image, crisp and well focused. The first step towards this is choosing the right transducer. There's a variety of transducers available in our armamentarium as our targets are superficial. We have to choose the one which gives a good axial and lateral resolution. 12 MHz probe with a 25 mm footprint will be a good choice for smaller children. The next step is to select the preset as nerve and the target to superficial. Even with the selected probe, further there's an option to choose the frequency. Here it is between 13 MHz to 8 MHz. In pediatrics, I will choose the highest available frequency. So here I'll set it at 13 MHz. And choose the focus number and position depending on the depth. For a depth of 2 cm, GE Logic provides maximum of 2 focal points. Now I have set it at 1 focal point and note the change in the image as the focal point is adjusted. Now this image I have put up for you all to understand the extent of magnification that we see on the screen. This is a 38 mm transducer. The image on the screen is something like 4 to 4.5 times magnified. So an artery which appears to us something like 1 centimeter on the screen is actually only 0.17 centimeter. That is, it is less than 2 millimeter wide. Next step is to use adequate coupling medium so as to avoid air. And point number 5 is the orientation marker. I always choose to use the probe in such a way that the left of the probe corresponds to the left of the screen and use it accordingly on the patient. Bear in mind that it is on the same 14 centimeter width of the screen that we are choosing to represent something that is just 2 centimeter deep or something which is as deep as 15 centimeter and above. The scale of magnification and the footprint of the image changes with the depth we select. The depth of nerves and plexus varies with age, ranging from a few millimeter in a neonate to something like a few centimeters in a child who is 10 years and above. Hence, the equipment we use should be able to adjust to these variations. While needling in such superficial depths, needle artifacts, especially the reverberation artifact, may cause confusion and error during ultrasound guided procedures, especially the out of plane needling. We may see something like a needle tip that is inside a vessel, but actually it is not. It is the first harmonic. We have already seen that caudal is one of the most popular blocks in pediatric patients. So let's begin with central neuraxial scanning itself. The ultrasound in infant demonstrates the entire neuraxial conduit as the posterior vertebral elements are less ossified. And to get a better view, we need to give an adequate flexion in order to separate the posterior elements. This image shows a panoramic view of the vertebra using ultrasound in an infant. It looks so much like a lateral radiograph. So these are the posterior vertebral body of the lumbar vertebrae, the lumbosacral junction and the sacral vertebrae. The coccyx and the spinous process appear hypoechoic or anechoic because they are not ossified. Anterior to the sacrum and the coccyx is the rectum. Coming to the intravertebral contents, the continuous white lines are the posterior and the anterior dura respectively. The hypoechoic tapering structure is the conus medullaris, which continues as the filum terminale. The echogenic thread-like structures are the chorda equina. Bear in mind that the spinal cord ends at the lower border of L1 or the upper border of L2 vertebra, and the dura extends up to the S2 vertebra. This is a transverse image at the level of the cauda equina. We can again appreciate the spinous process, the lamina, the posterior dura, the cauda equina, and the anechoic CSF. The dimple we see here corresponds to the posterior superior iliac spine, and the Tafia line crosses the L4-L5 interspace or the L5-S1 interspace in a neonate and infant. The vertical line through the PSIS crosses the S2 vertebra. So bear in mind that the dural sac ends at S3 level and spinal cord at L3 vertebral level in neonate. By placing the child in lateral position with flexion of the spine and hip, it creates a cephalate shift of the dural sac and is advantageous. Now, this is the depth. This is the depth between the needle tip and the dural sac. If your needle is inserted too much inside, then it can pierce the dural sac and cause a total spinal. And I prefer to use a ultrasound probe of a larger footprint so that it gives a greater view of the spine. Now this is how a longitudinal scan looks. The needle tip is abutting on the dura. And on a transverse scan, we can see the bony projections, that is the sacral conum, and the sacrococcygeal membrane, as well as the posterior surface of the sacrum. Suppose we are doing a transverse scan slightly caudal, then we can see a hypoechoic oval structure which is the unossified coccyx. It is an indication that we have gone too distal to the sacral hiatus and we have to scan higher up. So as we inject local anesthetic, we can see the local anesthetic collecting in the epidural space and dipping down the dura. This can be well appreciated both in an axial view as well as a transverse view. This is one block which we had very good success even with landmark guidance, as the landmarks are easily palpable, structures are superficial. What is the advantage we are going to gain by using ultrasound? One is we can demonstrate the real-time LA ascent, and this provides opportunity for research to identify the volume that is required to provide a certain level of block. The next is we can easily visualize the needle tip. This can avoid complications such as total spinal, osteomyelitis of the sacrum, and damage to the rectum. Now, this is the area that is prone for many anatomical variations, and we have to train ourselves with a normal anatomy before we can detect variations. So my suggestion is that whatever the case, even if it is a simple caudal, try to use ultrasound so that we can train our eyes to the normal anatomy, and it will take quite some time before we are able to detect variations. Coming to the supraclavicular block, this is how the supraclavicular brachial plexus looks in a thin adult with a long neck. We still need a depth of 2.7 centimeters. In a child, our eyes may be searching for something larger. The structures are tiny and a lot more structures are included under the footprint. One important complication to avoid with this block is pneumothorax. This was one reason why this block was generally avoided either with landmark guidance or using nerve stimulator. And ultrasound has given us a major advantage. We have to select our depth in such a way so that we get the pleura and the first rib in view. To get an image like this, we still need some preparations to be done. Open the neck properly. Keep in mind the differences in various age groups. We may need to use a head ring and a shoulder roll, etc. While draping, ensure that all the anatomical landmarks are in vision, such as the midline, the sternocleidomastoid, etc. And remember that in younger children, the first rib may not be fully ossified. Again, we should be able to differentiate the rib from the pleura. The rib casts an acoustic shadow. We shall not be able to see anything beyond the rib. In case of pleura, we should look for the sliding sign. In the first image that is put up here, we can see that the C8 and T1 neural elements are just emerging from below the first rib. And the distance between the pleura and the C8 T1 elements is less than or equal to 5 millimeter. And suppose we are using an in-plane needling from lateral to medial, targeting the corner pocket, and our needle goes slightly deeper, then there's a high chance of injuring the pleura. While in the second image, we can see that the subclavian artery and the entire brachial plexus are actually resting over the first rib. So now we get an additional barrier, rib, to lie between the corner pocket and the pleura. Now, how can we get this visualization? By gently tilting the probe in this direction, we can get the plexus to lie entirely over the first rib. Uh, Hypoechoic vessels may be seen among the brachial plexus nerves, which also look hypoechoic. So always make it a habit to use color Doppler to differentiate between them. And this is an image where we have used color Doppler, and we can see a mirror image artifact of the subclavian artery. This gives us an indirect indication that the subclavian artery in this image is actually resting over the pleura and not the first rib. The needle has been inserted in plane from lateral to medial, bevel facing upwards. Needle is very clearly seen, confident. But what's happened to our target? The subclavian artery and the corner pocket is now over the pleura. The direction of the ultrasound beam over our targets have changed minutely. Here the depth is set at 1.8 cm. That means the distance between these 2 points is 5 mm. And the distance between the needle tip and the pleura is actually less than or equal to 2 mm. That's how close they are. So no doubt why this block was not favored in the pre-ultrasound era. Now, should I inject the local anesthetic or should I withdraw the needle? I probably shall not withdraw the needle, but shall ensure that my needle tip is continuously under visualization. I shall feel a small pop and inject the local anesthetic. There's a good spread of local anesthetic. This is just around 2 ml of local that has been injected. Volume is of a concern in smaller kids. Say a child who is around 12 kg. Maximum we can use is 12 ml of 0.25% bupivacaine. But you should be able to do the same job with 3 to 4 ml itself. Again, I want you to note that the brachial plexus is now over the first rib. Again, there has been a change in beam direction. This image shows the anterior and posterior divisions of the upper trunk. We can confirm this by dynamic scanning too. If these clusters are missed, the block may become patchy, and if the lateralmost cluster is missed, the musculocutaneous nerve will be spared. Ulnar nerve sparing is frequently described with supraclavicular brachial plexus block, but musculocutaneous nerve sparing has also been reported. If you want to have some spread over the neural elements too, pull the needle out without damaging the anterior division, redirect over the plexus, and deposit the local anesthetic there too. Remember never to inject against high resistance. This is a sign of intrafascicular injection. Even if our needle tip is within the brachial plexus sheath, we may feel a slight resistance, but that resistance will ease away quickly. All these changes in the brachial plexus elements such as roots, trunks, divisions, cords and individual nerves we are talking about is actually happening over a small distance, that is around 1 to 1.5 cm in an adult itself. In smaller children, this may be half a centimeter, and a few degrees change in the ultrasound beam itself can easily change the picture. Now, can we totally avoid this? These are the 3 images. I have compiled them here, in which the yellow arrow is representing the anterior division of the upper trunk in the 3 images, and the red arrow is indicating the rib. Now we can see that there has been minute changes in the ultrasound beam insonation. Can we totally avoid this? No, my opinion is no. We do not have perfectly robotic hands to totally avoid even a fraction of a degree of tilt. But we can definitely work on our needling skills and cautiously approach the target slowly and steadily. Coming to the below clavicle blocks, costoclavicular block or lateral infraclavicular, yes, both can be used in children. We can either use a single point injection in the lateral infraclavicular block, which has also been shown to give a success rate of 99%. But because we can visualize the drug spread, if you feel that the single point injection is not giving an adequate drug spread, try to maneuver the needle towards the other cords too. Coming to the axillary brachial plexus, it has been used even in infants and children less than 2 years old. Only one thing I want to mention is the axillary vessels are very superficial, and the vein can get easily compressed because of the pressure of the probe itself. So you may have to loosen on the P part of the part maneuver. So you can use the angulation, rotation and tilting maneuver, but apply very less pressure. Again, a single point injection may suffice, but keep in mind that the musculocutaneous nerve has to be separately blocked. Moving on to the truncal blocks. Paravertebral block, the targets are very clear, easy, they're not very deep. Here we have to look for the spinous process, the lamina, the transverse process and the pleura, and the superior costotransverse ligament. Needle can be inserted in plane. We can feel a small pop of the superior costotransverse ligament or the internal intercostal membrane and inject the drug. As the drug is injected, we can see the pleura getting dipped down. Coming to abdominal wall blocks, here I have represented the tab block, the ILIH block and the rectus sheath block. You can see that all the muscles and fascia, they appear so clear in pediatrics. This is because the body water content in children is higher, and this affords better identification of the anatomical structures. So one point to note is that the planes are very superficial and a steeper angle can cause intra-abdominal insertion. In the rectus sheath block, you can see that the round hypoechoic structure that we are seeing in the midline is actually the abdominal aorta. The ILIH block, we can either see the nerves in the same plane or they can be separated in different planes as I have represented here. Coming to the lower limb blocks, the femoral nerve can be blocked either at the level of the inguinal crease or in the adductor canal. The problem of anisotropy exists even in kids. We have to use this tilt. The popliteal sciatic nerve block, again the problem of anisotropy. Use the trace back and forth technique to see the splitting and the joining of the tibial nerve and the common peroneal nerve. The nerve may also look hypoechoic in small infants. Always try to use the Doppler to differentiate the nerve from the popliteal vein and the artery. Now coming to one of the biggest controversies of pediatric regional anesthesia. On one hand, extreme precision is needed. So an immobile child is absolutely necessary both for increasing success and reducing complications. On the other hand, does general anesthesia or sedation increase the risk of nerve injuries as a sedated child cannot communicate paresthesia? What does the analysis from Pediatric Regional Anesthesia Network say? A majority of the children in the study had received general anesthesia. The remaining, especially the older children, had received sedation. And these are the neurological complications. It was 7.3 per 10,000 children who were about 10 years of age. And the incidence was 1.2 per 10,000 blocks in 3 to 9-year-old children. And they state that the neurological complications were primarily sensory in nature and resolved over a period of weeks to months, with only 2 cases demonstrating a sensory deficit beyond 3 months. There were no cases of permanent motor deficit recorded. No wonder why kids below 2 years, they were not able to identify because probably the child cannot communicate that well. However, the favorable evidence is that there were no cases of permanent motor deficit recorded. Finally, coming to last. This is the recommended dose of local anesthetic in pediatrics. Bupivacaine and levobupivacaine can be used as 0.25% solution and ropivacaine as a 0.2% solution. So never increase the maximum dose. Plasma protein binding is lower and intrinsic clearance is decreased, especially in young children. While aspirating, avoid giving too much of negative pressure, which can itself collapse the veins. Use the incremental injection technique, and we can use a pharmacological marker. In children, it is 0.5 micrograms per kg of adrenaline. So, T-wave changes are appreciated in children before changes in heart rate and blood pressure. But bear in mind that the ECG changes can be masked by anesthetics, with the inhalation anesthetic agents having more effect on masking these changes when compared to intravenous agents. Always use ultrasound guidance to visualize the needle tip. Use color Doppler to differentiate vessels from the hypoechoic nerves and observe the local anesthetic spread as we inject. We can hydrolocate using saline before using local anesthetic. To summarize, ultrasound has increased the scope of regional anesthesia practice in children by increasing the success and lowering the complications. Equip yourself with knowledge and skills for safe practice of regional anesthesia and you may see your horizons expanding. Thank you one and all for your patient hearing.